an example I seem to remember was you have a husband who has losses, you have a wife who has an asset standing at a gain. No, it's the other way around. It's the other way around. You have a wife who has an asset standing at a gain, and you have a husband with asset standing with an asset standing at a loss, who transfers the loss standing asset to the wife, or vice versa, it doesn't really matter, but the example was this. So wife sells both assets, makes a gain on her asset, makes a loss on the husband's asset, offsets the loss against the gain, job done, no tax. The revenue say, you must be joking, we will invoke section 16A in that situation. And you think, my God, that's not a scheme, that's just a married couple organising their affairs in a reasonably sensible way. But anyway, I put that to one side. But coming back to my point, what is likely to lose value? Cars. Cars are not liable to capital gains tax, providing it's a road car. What else? Wasting assets. Wasting assets are not liable to capital gains tax. What's a wasting asset? A wasting asset, an asset with a life expectancy of less than 50 years. Having said that, a lease can be a wasting asset, and leases are liable to capital gains tax. So, I mean, there are some sort of exceptions here. So you have that sort of concept that if you've got something that's likely to go down in value, it's outside the scope of capital gains tax. Other things like medals and I don't know, national savings certificates are done for political motives, to engender a bit of interest in national savings products, and on the other hand to not incur the wrath of the Sun or the News of the World in caning people for selling off their medals when they're impoverished. But anyway, that's the general position. The general position was that at the beginning, the concept was capital gains tax needed to be at a low rate. We are talking here at a time when income tax rates were high. I've already mentioned that in 73 they were at 98% on investment income. Capital gains tax was 30%, deliberately done that way, because it was recognised that if you make a capital gain and are taxed onerously on that, it is a bit punitive, I won't say unfair, but it's punitive, particularly if you make a capital loss, you can't set it off against, for instance, your other income. So capital gains tax sort of ring-fenced and gains treated more favourably. What happened was that in 1988, a politician called Nigel Lawson came along, and in his reasonably earth-shattering budget of that year said that I've got a great idea, we'll do two things. The first thing is we will reduce the rate of income tax to 40%. This was a huge reduction. I have to say, investment income surcharge had already gone by that point. So we are not comparing 75% to 40%, we are comparing 60% to 40%. It's still a big drop. Coming down to 40%, that was earth-shattering stuff. But he then said, oh, and I've got another great idea. What we'll do is, we no longer, now income tax is so low, we no longer need capital gains tax to be at 30%, because if it's at 30% and you're a basic rate taxpayer, you'd be better off paying income tax. And even if you're a higher rate taxpayer, it's not that much more. So what we'll do is sort of merge it. It's still capital gains tax, but it's taxed at income tax rates. That was the break that was made. Before then, capital gains tax was at 30%. Income tax was at rates that went all the way up. But in 88, Lawson basically brought the two into line. Before he did that, there had been some tinkering with the rules anyway. Inflation was a real issue in the late 60s, 70s, early 80s. Because the concept here was that the starting point was April 1965. So you were paying capital gains tax on gains realised from April 65 to the point of realisation. And perhaps at this point I'll lob in another observation, which is capital gains tax is inherently avoidable. it is inherently avoidable, which is why making punitively high rates of capital gains tax is completely counterproductive. It doesn't get anybody anywhere. If you want to use capital gains tax to raise revenue, the worst thing you can do is make the rates high. Why is that? Because you can easily avoid it. And I'm not talking about avoiding it by indulging in some obtuse, aggressive, obnoxious scheme that is designed to produce some kind of magic loss out of thin air. I'm talking about avoiding it by doing the easiest thing in the world, and that is doing nothing. You do not pay capital gains tax if you don't make a disposal. You only pay capital gains tax if you make a disposal and realise the gain. If the rate of capital gains tax goes north, there will be plenty of people who will think, I'm not selling, I will sit on my asset. And of course then there's plenty of slightly more clever people who will think, oh yes, I'm not selling, but I could really do with some money from that asset. I know what I'll do, I'll take a loan on it. I will use it as security for a loan. Raising loans and securing it on an asset is not a disposal of the asset. So it is easy to avoid capital gains tax just by not selling. So I just put that to one side, leave that in the air or park it somewhere. But coming back to inflation, you then had the situation that you're taxing gains from 6th of April 65 with no adjustment for inflation at all. Nothing at all. And no adjustment for length of ownership at all. Capital gains tax, a flat tax, 30%, end of story. And indeed, it is worth reminding ourselves at this point that what we're talking about as capital gains tax sort of applies equally to companies. Companies do not pay capital gains tax. They do pay corporation tax on their chargeable gains. And the rules are pretty damn similar. Well, they used to be. They've changed now. They've diverged a bit. But in the beginning, they were very, very similar indeed. So similar, in fact, that there used to be a deduction for corporation tax purposes, so that when the rate of corporation tax, for instance, and I remember this vividly, was 35%, if you made a chargeable gain, you deducted 1/7 of the gain before you charged it to corporation tax. And what was the magic of the 1/7? It made the effective rate 30%. So the two were sort of in tandem. That's how it worked. But inflation, a big problem through the 70s, the 80s. People didn't like it. You're paying tax on gains which are only there because of inflation. Your asset isn't really more valuable. And if you're selling asset 1 to buy asset 2, unless you could claim something called rollover relief, which I'll touch on in a moment, you're losing real tax out of an asset where you haven't got a real gain. So what happened? It was Lawson who in 1985 introduced a scheme of, firstly, indexation allowance. Secondly, originally indexation allowance was a bit of a muddle in my view, because it was based on the value of the asset at March 1982, even though at that point capital gains tax hadn't been rebased to April or March 1982. But then, in a subsequent budget, capital gains tax was rebased to 82. So at that point, inflation sort of wasn't a problem anymore. It wasn't a problem anymore because they'd brought the effective date forward to March 82, but also inflation gains from March 82 onwards were taken out by indexation relief, the movement in the retail prices index. When our current or our previous occupant of number 11 Downing Street went for simplification, what did he do? What did he do that was there to simplify things? He simplified it by chucking out the inflation adjustment, chucking out taper relief, which had been introduced with effect from April 98 onwards. So now you pay tax on the gain that you have made from point A to point B, and point A has not been brought any further forward than April 1982. But he said, what we'll do is we'll tax it at a relatively low rate.